We're live. All right.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I didn't do my vocal warm-ups today. I wonder if my voice sounds much different than it normally does. I am Brandon Testers, LCPC. That means I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for many reasons. And today with me is Amelia. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Hello. My name is Amelia Moyer Perez, and I am an executive functioning coach at Effective Artistry, among other things. But today I'm here to most likely talk about stuff related to that, but we'll see.
Yeah. Amelia is one of our EF coaches. She's been with us for almost 6 months, 5 months now. And we have a very long and intensive training process. So, first, probably 2 or 3 months of that is just a lot of training stuff. But I'm glad to have her here today. Mike Wang, who's been joining us a lot, is not going to be joining us all the time. He and I do that podcast together. I don't even know how much of this you know, Amelia, so maybe I'm explaining it to you too.
Yeah.
So on the podcast days, he's there, and he's joined for a couple of non-podcast things, but he runs the school. He can't join us for every week. So I'm glad to have Amelia here, and your first opportunity to be in front of everybody and people to see you. Of course, we have no idea how many people actually watch this.
Yeah, and it's funny because I didn't even plan, and I actually didn't know until 7 minutes ago whether or not I was actually going to be joining or not, but I enjoyed the impromptu nature of it. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what we do. I mean, in our coaching, and when I do therapy or some of our therapists do therapy, it's all the same. It's authentic, and it's
and I think we've both at different times. I know you've talked about it here, and we've had conversations about it. But the idea of waiting. I mean, I didn't wait. I just didn't know until the last moment that I would be doing this. But that eliminates any possibility to be preparing and what am I going to talk about and what am I going to say, because I'm just showing up. But even if I did know beforehand, I probably would be in the same situation of okay, it's going live, so now is when.
Yeah, it's funny because when we were having guests for the podcast, they'd always join 5 minutes before the thing, and it would just be Cecil, who often is on camera but hasn't been, and definitely doesn't during the podcast because Mike is. So Cecil will do the tech and give people a quick walkthrough of everything we're going to do. And it's so rushed. It really makes me think of when you watch shows where for whatever reason the character's on one of the Tonight shows or whatever, and they get 5 minutes as they're walking, okay, Ed's going to do this and this and this and this. I was that's so unrealistic, but no, that's pretty much how it goes. Not that this is, the Ed Carson show or whatever. We're much cooler than Johnny Carson. Who was Ed? I don't remember.
I'm not the right person.
Ed Sullivan. Anyway, quick tech thing. For some reason, the StreamYard is disconnected from our Facebook page, and we couldn't fix it in time for this. So this is only on Twitch and YouTube today. And I know that some people normally watch from Facebook, so I feel terrible. We don't even know who the admin of our Facebook page is to be able to log in and announce to people. But we'll figure it out. Yeah. Kitch Squatch is here. Hi, Kitch Squatch. And yes, it was great. See, I don't have to miss him because I get to interact with him all the time, but we'll get him back on the stream at some point.
Yeah, I miss him. I haven't talked to both of you at the same time in a little while, but I enjoyed our early conversations that we had.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed you and Cecil on the stream, not just as well as Mike, but yeah.
Yeah, Effective Artistry has been growing, which is great, and it also kind of pulls us into different directions. So Cecil, who runs the operations of everything, has a lot more on his plate and not as much time to be doing things like this, whereas, this is my job, so I get to do it anyway. So we do, this is always a Q&A, and we weren't joking about Amelia joining last minute. I mean, I know you've watched the stream before, but I'm kind of explaining this to you because I know you've seen it, but just in case, as well as the audience, that it's a Q&A. Anybody who's here in the chat, anything you ask, anything you say, that's going to guide our conversation. We'll start by just talking about, I don't even know what, we'll find something, because we don't want there to be pressure on the people in chat that have to go for certain things. But we would love it if you gave us Q&A stuff. Just the more you interact, the better.
Yeah.
We get to focus in on and be impacted by you guys then, instead of you just watching a show of us talking about whatever we're talking about. But having said that, what should we talk about to start?
Oh, cool. Thank you for that question. What do we mean by body doubling? I wonder if you're asking that because you've noticed that I have recently been dabbling in streaming myself with body doubling stream where I've been drawing. But that term, I think that what a body double is an actor's person that looks like them and is like there to do
they're stand-ins basically.
It's not a stunt double. They just kind of stand there. But in executive function terms, the idea is that many of us find it helpful to have another person in the room or in the same area or virtually with us, also working on something which helps us to focus on what we want to focus on. I think there's... Yeah, go ahead.
It's funny, Cecil just messaged me to say body doubling when I was saying what should we talk about. So perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, to expand a little bit. So for those of you who don't know, I should have thought of this because anybody who subscribes to the Twitch channel would also get notifications when we go live for whatever. So Amelia has been doing these. We're starting a body doubling series, and your role in it is art with Amelia. She does art on camera, and we'll talk a bit about that. But yeah, body doubling. The idea is that many of us, not many, all of us are impacted by our environment, right? Our context. And in particular, other people are a part of that. So everything that we were saying, Amelia and I, right? Like that we want questions and we want to interact because that shapes the conversation and guides the conversation. The same thing, we pick up on social cues, and some of us are more sensitive to that, more guided by that than others. And this is particularly relevant in, to neurodivergent people, and in particular ADHD people as a subset of that, tend to be very impacted and guided by other people around them, what they're doing. So body doubling is, I'm going to do work because then you have subtle cues that you should also be doing work somehow, without being overt and saying you should do this work. Just the fact that you're observing me do it makes your brain say, oh, I want to do that too. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of siloed that into different things. And for Amelia, who is an artist of many kinds, but in particular is doing visual art. Is it painting or drawing or?
Drawing. I do paint sometimes. Collage. Yeah. Another thing is that idea of doing it on a stream is that a lot of people might encounter this idea, think it's cool, but not always have access to someone in their daily life that can sit with them. So this is hopefully a way to make it accessible for someone who likes the idea and would want to try it out and see if it works for them. And also sometimes you can... Consent is very important, but also if someone is in your space at home or anywhere that you can comfortably sit near and work on, I think you could like secretly body double around them if it's someone close to you. But and I think like for many reasons over the past year and a half now, a lot of people have been realizing that they're having trouble with things related to executive function now that they're at home, and there are many reasons why that is, but I think one piece of it is like if you were used to being in school or at work in an office where everyone around you is working or studying, and then suddenly you are at home either alone with no one else to have that reference, or kids who are playing, or any number of other situations, suddenly it can be a lot harder to focus on or do what you want to do. But it's not unique to this situation. I think maybe just more people are becoming aware of that and seeking.
Yeah. We've all had contexts before this, and I mean, it's been so long now since this started that many people have developed new contexts, but there's a reason, like when we talk about sleep, there's a reason that we will give advice of like, try as much as possible not to do anything in your bed other than sleep. Like the brain learns to associate context with actions. And so when we can make an action a default response to a given context because you never do another thing within that context, the easier it gets. If you're going into the office to do work, it's easier to focus on work at the office than at home. Of course, that's generally speaking. That's not always true. But yeah, some of that context is the way that the work, the office is structured, right? The physical things there. You have the tools that you need, and theoretically there should be some kind of a, flow planned out of what departments are near what. And I've never worked in like a big thing that has departments, so I'm just assuming. But some of that context is other people. So theoretically, the closer matched the person that's body doubling with you, the closer matched their activity is to whatever it is that you're trying to do, the more effective it should theoretically be. And yeah, streaming is not going to be as effective as if you were in the same physical location, because same with Zoom and all these other things, we just have less data about the other person to access. You're cut off, you're not seeing them all. It's not 3D, blah, blah, blah. So if you're trying to do homework, you can come do body doubling with art with Amelia, and it still might be effective, right? It's not like only for doing visual art. It's just the more closely matched, theoretically, the bigger impact it has. But so yeah, especially for you artists out there, artists of any kind, and especially visual artists who are wanting to do that, work on your art. Do you have a scheduled time that you do it, Amelia?
I don't yet, but I was thinking I guess I could start choosing one. Last week it was Thursday, maybe evening. So there were 3 or 4 people there, which was more than the previous week. So I think that was a good time. So
cool.
I'll try that again this week, and if it works well again, then I'll see if I can decide to lock it in. And
yeah, I mean, the idea of the body doubling series is it's based around what the people doing it, and so far it's just Amelia, but we'll add more on if it goes well and people are interested. Is to have both like scheduled ones so people can plan around and show up to it, but also to just because it's helpful for you too, right, Amelia, to be able to do it this way. So sometimes you're just going to go live randomly to body double, and I honestly don't know, but I assume that for people who like subscribe to the Twitch channel, that they'll get some notification saying that
or on YouTube.
So we'll schedule some things and maybe not other things. Amelia, you're about to go through a big move, right? So that
might change things a little bit, but we'll see. Maybe. I mean, the setup I have now is pretty rudimentary, but what I ended up doing about that was realizing it's a little distracting for me to focus on something I want to be super detailed and meticulous with. But that led me to specifically work on things or create things for myself to work on that were really low stakes, or I wouldn't be upset if I like messed it up or something, just for the sake of getting there and treating it as like a warm up or just an easy, I'm not super attached to a specific outcome with this piece, because I'm like looking at the computer and balancing my iPad precariously so you can kind of see what I'm drawing, but hopefully that setup will improve, and then that will allow me to work on more stuff. But it's been good to find that alternative because I think it could be useful at other times. I realized, like, say you want to draw, but or work on, any art piece, but you're kind of tired, or you're not going to have the resources to put as much focus as you would like to into it, but you still want to do something, then you can have some easier tracing or coloring or lower stakes type of work to defer to when you still want to engage, but not at the deepest level. So
I like that a lot, and I want to kind of connect that to both the process of what you are doing, what we're doing, but also the content of it and why, just kind of connecting it all. Because anybody who's been watching this stream for a while, and I don't know how many there are, there's at least a few of you who've been around for a while, which I love and appreciate, by the way. When we started doing this, it was in the basement of my house, and I spent so many weeks trying to waving back, hello. I spent so many weeks like trying to refigure out my setup and make it better for the next week because the lighting was bad or this was bad, and I stressed out about it, and now we're here. Like there is a tendency for people who are very cognitively focused, which many neurodivergent people are, to not go on a thing until you know exactly how to do it and are able to do it in that way, as opposed to just starting with what you're capable of doing right then and there, what you know and have access to right then, and kind of iterate as you go along, which is part of what we mean. I realize I don't know that we've ever really defined authenticity, and we say it all the time because it's like a big word for us, but that's part of what we mean. Is we're not trying to only show like polished, finished products of things. I think that's totally understandable. I'm not saying everybody should put out like all their work that they don't like, but it has a kind of second order impact of, well, people don't see the mess, they just see the good stuff that you're proud of, right? That the movie we see is everybody's like take that they love the most. We don't see all the takes that they didn't enjoy and didn't want to share. So people get stuck in this place then of like, oh, unless I can do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it. And we're showing you just start and go. And
and I think it's a note on that, as far as like even today I was like, okay, I hope we can meet like 30 minutes before to talk about everything we're going to talk about. And like I said at the start, I just jumped in, and giving yourself more opportunities to do that in big and small ways, I think, is one of the ways to gradually kind of shrink down the fear of showing up unprepared. When you do it a few times, and you can be, well, to bring up another term that we use a lot is unconditional positive regard. Like, even if I blow it, I'm not going to be mad at myself because I still did something big by showing up and even trying. And what does blow it even mean? Like, I don't say anything. Well, there's someone else there who can help me out. And with the body doubling, I remember when I decided I was going to do it, I was like, that's scary. And a big part of me is like, I don't want to do that, but I know that's not actually true, and I do want to do it, so I am going to do it, and I'm really nervous. And I can honestly say, like, yeah, I think they could be a lot more polished, but I'm getting there, and by putting it out there and still working my way through it and letting other people see, then I can get feedback from them, and also, like I said before, kind of diminish that, like, that the only truth is that it's scary to do things and not be ready, and be like, you can do things, figure it out as you go, and it's actually not that bad. So next time I have a similar opportunity, I'll have previous experience to draw on. How did I call that?
I think she's referring to unconditional positive regard.
Oh yeah, so that's something we could expand on a little more. Like, we use this when we talk about working with clients, the way we regard them, the way we regard ourselves as practitioners. Unconditional positive regard. Like, no matter what you say or do, I'm not gonna run away, think you're bad, yell at you. I'm just gonna sit here and
I regard you positively.
Yeah.
There are no
it's not gonna change my opinion of you or how much I value you. That's both to someone we're interacting with and to ourselves. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, it's a term from therapy circles. Carl Rogers developed it. It's one of his. He has like the necessary and sufficient elements of the therapeutic interaction, I think is what it's called. But it's, as long as you do these things, it's helpful therapy, and if you don't do these things, it can't be helpful therapy. So it's one of those things. And obviously, Amelia is not a therapist, although there's some overlap in working one-on-one with people and helping them. It's different topics and different approaches, but. So unconditional positive regard is an important part of helping somebody, because how can you feel safe to say whatever it is you're struggling with? Half the time that people are struggling with a thing, it's because, or at least in part because, they don't feel comfortable talking about the thing, communicating about the thing. So we have to make an effort. Coach, therapists, teachers, anybody, what we're trying to do if we're trying to help people move forward on something is we got to start by making sure that they're comfortable and safe in saying the thing. But it's often misinterpreted as like, when people will explain it, they're like, well, what if I murder someone? Will you still think I'm? And no, that's not what it means. We can disagree or dislike things that you do, things that you say. What unconditional positive regard really means to us, how we interpret it, is there's always more. It's the same thing as like iterating, right? That if I attempt a thing and it doesn't go well, rather than judging myself as though that thing is now complete and I can never do anything like it again and I failed and I, well, no, there's more. There's a reason that whatever you were attempting to do didn't happen the way that you intended it to go. Even if you do only have that one shot and will never do that specific thing again, you take information and knowledge from that thing and then you iterate.
Yeah, like you did the best you could with what you had at that time. And yeah, like you're saying, that's, I feel, a big one. Like, even if you don't get to do that again, the information you can take from that and carry with you for next time. It's like, okay, I didn't like how that went, but I'm still okay with myself as a person or you as a person. But if I want to avoid this situation, rather than just be like, okay, the only thing that we have to take from this experience is that you suck, is like, okay, I have some other, I can try doing this differently, or like, I wish I had done that. So, or if nothing else, just this attitude of like, yeah, like you said, there's more. There's reasons why, and like life goes on. There's going to be another chance. So
Yeah, the thing you might have learned is like, I don't ever want to do that again. Like that's still a learning. You learned it was a bad experience, and yes, I'm careful. I'm hesitant when people talk about like, do this thing, it builds character, because often what they mean is, I think you will not enjoy this thing, but I don't really want to do anything about it, so I'm justifying it as it being valuable to do a thing you don't like.
mm-hmm.
And that's not what we're saying. We're not saying if there's something you don't want to do it anyway. We're saying that if you want to do something, go ahead and do it, even if you're not sure that it will go exactly the way that you want.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean don't prepare at all. It just means use what you've got, put in the appropriate, pay the right cost based on the resources available to you and the value of the thing to you, and iterate. Just keep going if you want to. And all right, let me put it this way. We talk about executive functioning, and I'm making an effort to be more, practically minded in my communication. When people break down executive functioning into different subcategories, right? One of the most common ones that people will focus on is initiation, the ability to start on a task. But the thing is, another one that people will often talk about, most people will have both of these, is transition, the ability to shift from one thing to another thing. Well, when do you ever start a thing that you weren't doing something else before? Like literally, unless we're talking about like coming into existence, right? We're separating it out. We're putting parameters around it because it's useful to do that, not because there's ever a time that you're actually just from the void starting a thing. You're always transitioning. And so that's kind of one way of looking at this, is two things that we have to do, our brains must do, that seem opposite and neither of them are real, is first we have to break things apart. We have to separate things into different, that's the computer and this is my pen and that's the desk. Even though in the full like complex reality of things, it's just atoms and molecules and whatever. It's our perception where we categorize it as the computer versus, the screen. Like the ace of hearts can be a thing, but the deck of cards can be a thing. So it's just how it's useful to us to separate out into different elements, make them discrete. And then the other thing we do is reconnect things. We connect this to that and this to that and kind of combine them all up. The whole process is about making it useful. So one thing that we do all the time is separate tasks out as though they're discrete, starting it and completing it, succeeding at it or failing at it, which is useful, but not actually true, because you don't stop existing afterward, I guess, unless you're doing a particular kind of a task and fail at it in a particular kind of way. I don't know. Be careful about skydiving, I suppose, make sure or whatever. There's just more. It's information, it's data. The only way to think that you have failed at is to put parameters around what that thing is, make it into something small and discrete and say it's done now. And our job is to kind of take those parameters away and say, nope, I mean, do you have, is it common? Certainly with my clients, this is common. I don't know if this happens with you a lot, where I'll say like, hey, what's been going on or what's on your mind? And they say nothing.
Yeah, it happens. And I think that recently we talked about this a little bit as like, is it really nothing, or either an experience they're having that they are not like assigning any value to the point where it's not even registering as anything, or that the language that they want to use to describe it, they're not sure how you're going to receive that. So it's easier than thinking about how to phrase it and all of that, just to say that and save themselves from needing to elaborate more. But usually in response to that, that's what's going to happen anyway, at least if they are talking to either of us. We would want them to elaborate, but yeah, what are like some of the ways that you meet that statement?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, obviously you're saying everything that we've talked about. We talked about it recently, actually. And yeah, you can't, it is not, you can't have literally done nothing. Existing is something. You were breathing, right? But we define things in certain ways. So then when someone says, hey, what have you been up to, or what's been happening, we make a lot of assumptions about what that means. They don't really mean literally anything that's been happening, even though I'm always careful to phrase it as that, right? What's been happening in your life, not what are you doing, just what has been happening. It's always something, but we say nothing because we put parameters around it. We're conditioned to say, yeah, nothing relevant, nothing important. Mm-hmm. Or you might even really not remember anything, although that's unlikely. Over the course of a whole week, you literally remember nothing. It's possible. But even if that was the case, it's still because you're defining what things are important and what things are not important to remember, right? Not fully consciously. That's not how that works, but to some extent. So when we call them interventions, right? Yeah, nothing significant, nothing I want to talk about. Most often, it's some version of nothing I think is relevant to this, to coaching or to therapy, thing we're doing. But see, here's the problem with that is one of those.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I feel like I could have told you something until you asked me that, and now I have.
So one of the things that I will do is when that happens, I'm like, no. If I'm asking what's on your mind, there's something there. That's what consciousness is. Like, you would have to literally be unconscious to not be aware of anything happening in your mind, in your awareness. But it's quite possible that right now what is there is, I don't know how to answer this question, or what is Brandon pressuring, or I feel like So then we can free ourselves up to say that. Even what we're trying to do is show that these bins, these parameters we put around things aren't real. We use them because they're useful, but sometimes they're not. And when they're not, we can take them away and look at it in a different way. So when we give interventions, which we do in every session, right? At the end of every session, we always give some, okay, this is what I'm going to suggest you try this week, or this is our plan, or whatever actionable thing. But we always make sure to say, now listen, you cannot fail this. If you do it and it helps in the way that we think it might, great. If it helps in some other way, but not the way we thought, still great. If it doesn't help at all, great. We know more. We wouldn't come up with this idea right now if we were predicting that it wouldn't work. So if you do it and it doesn't work, which, by the way, not doing it at all, forgetting about it, that's just a version of it not working. That's still useful, because now we know. We thought it would work and it didn't. Obviously, there's something, and we get more data and we try again, we iterate.
Yeah, another thing is, like, we mentioned this a little bit, like nothing significant happened, or something you're not, nothing could be a synonym for like, I watched YouTube videos for 4 hours, instead of like, the things I think you want me to come back and say, like, well, I finally cleaned my room, XYZ. But I'm just connecting this back to what we were talking about earlier with transitioning from tasks or switching between things that are divided, like same with kind of defining what is using your time to do nothing or something. The reason it's hard for me to talk about this is because I did like make a connection, but then we talked about stuff in between the like transitioning and then talking about when clients say nothing, and I still have the connection, but I'm having to transition between the two of them to like make the point I want to make, which is in my head, but is just taking me a little extra effort to connect. But I guess it's that there's context around what those like task A or B that you might want to be transitioning to instead of and like looking deeper. Same with like looking deeper into what that nothing is. Like can you give me an example of something that someone might have trouble with, or something that like?
Yeah, give us an example of something that one of you is having a trouble with initiating on or transitioning to,
Starting or stopping. Yeah.
And while we wait for the chat to respond, and if they don't, I'll give you something. But doing nothing can be very important. One thing I'll add in the meantime is, here's the thing: the entire idea of being able to learn, grow, change anything, well, it means that you have to access new information. And when people come to coaching or to therapy, it's in part because they want access to the information that they think that the coach or the therapist has and can share with them. And that's definitely part of it. But if you're going to go from a problem that hasn't been able to be solved to solving that problem, you have to, by definition, either have access to new, material resources or conditions or contexts, or access to new knowledge, new ideas about how to utilize what you already have access to. Meaning, you've already looked at everything you think is relevant. You're hoping that the person you're going to for help will be able to tell you how to combine the things that you already think is relevant in some new way that you didn't consider. And that does happen sometimes, but more often it's about, we need more information. I need more information from you. You need more information from me, but we both need more information about your context. So we're guiding your attention to new and different things. And that means, again, by definition, that we're going to be guiding your attention, giving you reason to pay attention to things that you don't think are relevant. If you thought they were relevant, you'd already know about them. And sometimes they aren't, and sometimes they are.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, for instance, is like, I said watching YouTube videos for 4 hours is a synonym for nothing because I don't think that's valuable. And then also wondering why I can't transition from that into starting my self-care, like going to brush my teeth. Well, for one, I'm getting a lot of reward from like learning about topics that are interesting to me. That's stimulating. And I happen to hate the light in the bathroom. It's horrible. It's too bright. I really don't like going in there at all. I just go anyway and don't like it and don't think about it while I'm there, except that I like never want to go in there until I recently started putting this like small lantern that gives really nice dim lighting in there. And it's like, it feels like the spa in here. This is true about my life, but also things that I hear people share with me often is like, yeah, I just can't switch to this other task. And sometimes there's awareness of like, well, because one is more pleasant and the other isn't. But when you, like Brandon is saying, information that you might not be registering or thinking is important, like, oh, what about the lighting in there? Or, thinking about some other piece of it that's making it.
You usually happen to be productive. That we ask questions. We very rarely ask why, or if we do, it's because we want your theory. We want to know. If you're saying, oh, I struggle to go to bed on time, and I say, okay, why do you think that is? I never say, why is that? Why do you think that is? Or what's your theory about it? Because you've already been thinking about it, and I want to know what things you think are likely to be impacting that. But I will work towards the question, maybe immediately, of, okay, what I want now is for you to just pay attention to what is also happening during those times. Not anything that you're worried about connecting, oh, this could cause it. No, just what else is happening, because then we can find correlations and patterns. I want to go back immediately because I was waiting for somebody to give an example, but nobody did. So back to what you were asking for. So a common example of things that people struggle to get started on, we'll say emptying out the email inbox, replying to emails that you need to reply to.
Yeah. Okay. So why you might not be starting on that and just continuing to do something else. I think kind of like with the brushing your teeth example was a more simplified example, but for that one, there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, it might just be the fact that there are multiple emails, and just that fact alone is overwhelming. There's a lot of them. I don't know how long it's going to take me. There's not there may like if there might not be very clear parameters on how long that's going to take. It's kind of an open-ended task, so that could be stressful for someone. And if it's your inbox and your emails and you don't have an assistant who's going to do it with you, then figuring out that, let's say, for example, those are part of the reasons that are preventing you from getting started, then you can try different things out, like say, okay, I'm just going to do one email. I only have to do one. Saying that I'm going to start working on that doesn't mean I need to sit down until I'm done with all of them, but when I do one, that'll be it for today. And then if I happen to keep going after that, that's great. But if not, I did the one I was going to do, and I'll do another one tomorrow, or some other form of compartmentalizing that task. And then not always, I know this is a common one, like break it into chunks, because I gave that example of just do one. But sometimes that has the reverse effect of, instead of making it seem more manageable, just making it seem like now you suddenly have like a ton of tasks, because now every chunk that you broke it down to is a task. So that may not work for somebody else. And that's why I was kind of like, oh, I don't know, because there's so many things. And I could think of things that could be challenging for me about that, or that other people have shared with me. But even beyond that, there's going to be many possibilities. But that's where, like we've been saying, kind of getting that context, or asking someone what they think is contributing to it, or what's going on generally around the time that they sit down to do that. And that's where you can really derive like an approach, which could be just making a conscious effort to change your thinking around that task and how you approach it. Now that you realize, like, I still need to do this. The solution isn't to just never answer my emails and go through my inbox. So if I'm already putting energy into this by thinking about it, by being stressed about the fact that I'm not doing it, then I can decide that I'm going to consciously like shift my mental perspective on what this task means, how I'm going to approach it. And once you realize that, maybe you don't necessarily have on your first level of awareness, like, oh my God, I have to do all the emails. You just have this feeling of anxiety. And then when you kind of think about it, break it down, like are really determined to get to the bottom of it, that's where you kind of extract, oh, okay, that's why I'm not doing it.
Yeah. Or at least that's your new theory about why, and it gives you something to test. And maybe it enables you to do something, and maybe it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And I want to go further into the philosophy, because I always do, but I think one of the things that's really helpful here is what Amelia, part of what you're talking about is that we look at the cost and the value, that people generally come having considered the value of a thing. I just don't care enough about it. I need to be more motivated. I'm lazy, which all of those words, different things to different people. But if you ask questions, it's almost always going to end up as, okay, how do you know you're lazy? Well, because I didn't do the thing. Well, why didn't you do the thing? Because I'm lazy, right? That it's after the fact and you describe it, but then we use it as a prescriptive or predictive thing when it's really just a descriptive thing. It just means I don't know why I didn't do it, so therefore I must say I'm lazy, even though that doesn't carry meaning. Anyway, people tend to look at the value, and we usually start by helping look at the cost. That making softer lighting in your bathroom, Amelia, means that it costs you less to go brush your teeth. And people will not think about those things a lot of the time. If we say, well, how do we make it cheaper, easier for you to brush your teeth? They'll say, we don't. It's brushing my teeth. There's not an easier way to do that. Because again, if you thought of that, you already would have known it. But if we ask questions, so one thing, and this goes back to what you were talking about with the low stakes practice in the body doubling. There's a very concrete thing. We make up new interventions. We don't have standardized ones. We have frameworks and approaches and what we look at. But that's the whole point of what we do. If we could give you a standardized intervention, why would we be meeting with you one-on-one? What would be the point, right? So with the the art, the body doubling, the low stakes stuff, one framework to look at is what I like to call skills practice, where what will often happen is that people categorize a thing as this, making art is this, and then don't break it down further into subsections of what does making art entail, what is this part of it, what is that part of it, so that I can get more granular and target smaller things. And I usually use a metaphor that's a sports metaphor, and I don't know if that might not work for everybody, but the idea is, a professional basketball player doesn't train to play basketball by only playing professional basketball games, that outside of that, you do lots of things outside of the moment so that in that moment you can perform more the way that you want to. And yeah, sometimes that means like running drills, and it's just very basic building block stuff. And sometimes it's about practicing plays or designing plays or sitting and watching film of you or your upcoming opponent, or just working out to get generally stronger because that's relevant, So
sleeping. I just wanted to, earlier Kit Squash said doing nothing is very important, and doing nothing is very, like, actually doing nothing to differentiate from like having stuff going on, but not having the language to say anything other than nothing, different thing. And yeah, for playing sports, doing art, existing, doing nothing.
So there's a relatively famous football player that played for the Steelers for a long time, and he played much, much longer than most football players. Most professional football players are done, by the time they're 30. And I'm blanking on his name. He's a linebacker, James something. Anyway, he played into his 40s, and he famously talked about that he would spend like $400,000 a year on treatments for his body, on taking care of his body. Like, he was able to do that not because of some freak willpower or desire or whatever, but he put so much into maintaining his body in that way. And yeah, that means that he was not doing all those other things, right? So sleep is part of that. I'll always remember when I was a younger actor, I met like an older, well, I'm saying older, but he was about the age I am now, mid-30s. And he was like, I realized one day, if I'm going to do this, be an actor, be a professional actor, I got to do it, and if that means that I stop going out and partying at night and spend some money on a good mattress so that I can sleep well, like, that's what I've got to do, and it doesn't mean that everything must be done in one way. But so one way of this is a particularly common thing when it comes to tasks that we think of primarily as intellectual or cognitive or creative, is that people tend not to pay attention to the physical element of those things. That someone who's talking about, I can't write this book, will almost never be paying attention to what is their typing speed, or are they holding the pencil in an inefficient pencil grip that drains more energy from them than is necessary, kind of thing. So that's one way to break it down is, okay, you don't have to make art, just do an exercise, right?
Right. Like, if I sit down to work on something, then I need to finish a picture. And if I don't, then I'm not doing art. I'm bad at art. I failed. But it can be, if you don't question those things, and if you just take things at face value, okay, making art, I have to make a piece when I sit down. And it can be really disheartening because it takes a long time. Well, not for everyone. You can do it fast, but it does take time. And also, yeah, like, okay, I'm just going to do some exercises or like drills today, or learn about, look at pictures that inspire me, or write down ideas that I have for stuff I want to work on later. Because then when I want to work on the stuff, I can just look at the list instead of then have to think of something.
Part of making art is ideating, right? Like, even if you never actually execute and make the art, coming up with the idea for the art is part of what is necessary in order to make art. So when people do that element of it, but then don't do the actual like execution, actually create it, oftentimes they'll say that's worse. They'll think worse of themselves for having done part of the process. I have all these ideas and I just can't, it's such a good idea and I just can't, blah, blah, blah. As opposed to, no, I did the ideating part, came up with a great idea, did not do the execution part, or at least didn't do it yet. Don't know if I will or if I won't, but did some good ideating. And like you were just saying, in order to come up with new ideas, you need new things to play around with, right? Like, we'll be doing some artist workshop stuff, like 8-week session, 12, I don't know. We're figuring it out. We're planning it. But one of the models that we use that will definitely be part of that is acquisition, arrangement, application. That It's about the way that the brain works, that to get new data, you have to get it from outside of yourself. That's acquisition. I have to observe things or be told about things. I have to somehow, if it's something I don't already have access to, have not noticed or remembered or whatever, I must get it from elsewhere. That's acquisition. It's attention. It's what things go into awareness, right? Then arrangement is, okay, now I can cut myself off from the environment. I got everything I need right now. I'm just going to play with it, take it apart, recombine it, come up with new things. And then application is once you arrive at, oh, I like this arrangement, let me do something with it, is taking it out of consciousness and then executing it. Executive functioning, that's step one as well. But that if I come up with the idea for the great American novel, well, then I still need to actually like sit down and move my fingers along the keys to write it. So yeah, you can't create something new without first acquiring, I don't know, call it materials, call it tools, call it data. I always call it data. I don't know why. Acquiring data from outside. I got to get stuff. And the better I am in arrangement, which most people who consider themselves artists are really, they like to spend a lot of time here combining and recombining and whatever. Well, then that ups the value of acquisition even more, because one new piece, I can combine and recombine so much off of that one.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sometimes just, I see this all the time with people complaining that they consume so much and don't produce enough. The consumption is part of the artistic process.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just was thinking about like looking at it in those three categories, and if you're feeling like I want it to be a little different, like it's out of balance for me, like I want to be doing more application, which might not necessarily mean like stop arranging or stop acquiring, but just noticing. One thing, for instance, that someone shared with me recently was like, I go to look for references for drawing, but then I just keep looking for the reference, and then I like, well, this one's pretty good, but what if I keep looking, and then the best one that I really want to use is just a few scrolls away, and then their drawing time gets used up because they spent the entire amount of time looking for references. So having this concept of like, okay, yes, I recognize this acquisition part is important, and I already know like I'm probably like arranging while I look for the reference because I'm thinking, am I going to want to draw this one or that one? But am I like going over the edge and eating up into my application time if you're thinking like that you've scheduled like an hour for yourself? Not to mention though that a lot of these things go on in the background anyway, all day long and all night, because that's how we are.
We're separating them out because it's useful to do so, even though we can't actually map that one-to-one to an experience. You back up, back and forth, but it is useful to have the categories, right? And, I think a lot about, Cecil actually came up with this metaphor a long time ago. Well, I say a long time ago, it's probably 5 months ago, but for me, that's a long time ago. Where the ocean contains like a massive, massive amount of power. That much mass moving, so much energy, so much power. And if you observe the ocean and you observe and find its patterns and then build around whatever it is, whatever you're trying to accomplish, you build your plans around what the ocean is already doing, then it's an incredible resource. You can harness that power, tap into it, not completely, but enough to do what you're trying to do, right? Whereas if instead of observing it first and learning to predict it and build around it, you just say, nah, I want to make this thing happen. I'm going to force it to do this. Well, you might get lucky and it happens to line up with something that's already happening. But it's quite likely that you're going to have to, that the power of the ocean is going to be an impediment to you, an obstacle that you need to overcome. And it's going to be a hard one. And sometimes people think that's worth it, right? Like, I don't want to get into geopolitics because I don't know enough about it, but obviously some people wanted the Panama Canal. Not an easy thing to do, but you can force it to do what you need, but it's expensive. So you can't do it all the time. The brain, your mind, your body too, hell, it's the same way. You already naturally do a bunch of things. So if you can start by observing what you already do And then whatever you want to be different than what it is, you build your interventions, your plans, your systems around what already happens is going to be a lot easier than if you're trying to force yourself to change those patterns. And sometimes you have to. Sleep is a very common example of this. A lot of us do a lot better if we go to sleep 2 a.m. and wake up at 10 a.m. And that doesn't always work because of other things we're trying to do in other people's schedules. So we have to try and change it. But just know it's costly. You don't magically all of a sudden your brain and body become ones that love going to bed at 10 p.m. And like you have to put in that same effort every night. It gets easier, but never as easy as just defaulting back to what you would do and if you had the ability to do anything you wanted kind of thing.
But if you are generally approaching things in your life from that perspective of working, like not against the current, but working with what you've already got, then when you do have to make those compromises, it's going to feel really different than like in every single area of my life, I'm suppressing the things I want to do, fighting against them. Like the problem is everything about me versus like, this is just how I am. I'm working with it. And there are some things that I'm going to need to adjust because even though I don't like it right now, it will be beneficial to me and others around me. And not only that, it's worth it. Not just for no reason.
We want to change things all the time. That's normal and good. And even what we want changes moment to moment. It's about how to identify what that is. It's not saying you shouldn't want anything to be different. We all want things to be different in different intensities and it's not the same. But yeah, we're not saying accept your life as it is, which some people do kind of give that message, and I don't like it. It's a bad message. No. You want to change something? Cool. Then the next question is, well, what do we do? And the question should go in this order, ideally, is, okay, I've identified what is happening and how I would like it to be different, doing something I'm not currently doing or stopping doing something I am or whatever. The first question should be, what do I do to make that happen? And you might have ideas right then and there. Cool. Go and test those ones first. Simplest answer that works is the best. If you don't, or if you try those ideas and they don't work, then the next question should be, what is it that is currently happening? That's where we get into the observation, because that's the most impactful thing on what you do next. Where are you?
Right? Yeah. And another piece of that is like, what am I trying to get? What need am I trying to meet by doing the things that I am currently doing, even if they're not working for me? What, like, is there, what am I trying to fulfill by doing whatever it is?
Another framework here that Amelia's, hinting at or, giving conclusions from is, I love to like make things pithy. Desire, design, deliver. That's this other framework. Yes, I like challenging myself to come up with, I'm blanking on alliteration. Which means this: in order to do anything, first you have to know what you're wanting to do, then you have to make a plan to do it, then you have to execute the plan. And when we have an intention to do a thing and it doesn't go the way that we want, we work the problem backwards. We start with, are there execution issues? And it makes sense to do that. That's the simplest fix, right? If it's there, we can quickly identify like, oh, if I change my pencil grip, then the lines will come out more like what I want to do, right? But if we're not doing any, if we're not finding success there, then we can back up and say, well, what is the plan? What is it, and what things am I attempting to do to get at what my aim is? Because maybe I need to change something there. It's not an execution issue. I'm planning as though I'm somebody else, or as though I have access to resources I don't have access to, or whatever. And if that's not working, then we want to make sure to go to, just as Amelia is saying, what is it that I'm wanting out of this? What is it that I'm trying to get here? Why am I doing this? And it's not worth doing that for everything. You couldn't, right? That I tell people, like in communication, right? Parents and children or whomever, you want somebody to do something, tell them, ask them, hey, will you do this? Will you not do that? Whatever. And if they do it, cool, no problem. If they don't, your next step right away should be to ask yourself, why am I asking this person to do this thing? And people skip that. They go to, I'm going to ask again, but harder. Or, I'm going to offer a reward, or I'm going to plead, or whatever, right? As opposed to just checking and making sure, it's especially common with kids because a lot of things that we do just in education or generally made sense in a different context than the one that they're in right now.
Yeah.
And so they genuinely don't understand what is the value in doing whatever thing we're asking them to do. So it's worth asking ourselves, because sometimes they're right. Sometimes there isn't value, but sometimes there is. But if we ask ourselves that question first, then we can explain it. This is why I'm asking you to do it, not just because I'm being arbitrary or whatever. This is what we're going for. And it's especially important with neurodivergent people, because if you tell me what to do, I might do it, but I have a lot of experience in my life of trying to do things the way that other people told me to do it, and then it didn't work out, right? This is, as an example, this interpreting things literally, for example, right? Like, I interpreted you literally. I know I did it correctly. I know what those words mean, and yet something's not right.
Amelia Bedelia is a classic example there.
Yeah. So neurodivergent people tend to develop an idea of like, okay, I'd much rather you tell me what we're trying to accomplish here, because then I can know what we're going for, and I can come up with, I've already had to figure out a bunch of my own solutions, right? Like, don't tell me to write the same word 50 times. Tell me that what you're going for is that I'm able to spell the word from memory, because then I might do it in a different way and still accomplish what you want. So we do end up with a lot of, why am I supposed to do this? Which people will often interpret as disrespectful, as opposed to like, no, genuinely, tell me what we're going for, and I'll go, I'm on board. So it's important to ask that question. I do want to, because we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon. Doesn't this time fly so fast?
It flew by, yeah.
It always seems, I mean, obviously I like talking. Time flies for me, but an hour just like, it's gone. Yeah, I do want to make sure that we kind of sum up some things, right? That cost and value are both worth looking at. Look at making things cheaper for yourself, not just more important for yourself to do. We tend to default to the value that, yeah, we want things to be different all the time. So we come up with plans and then enact those plans to make it different. That's good. If it doesn't go the way that you're expecting it to go, then we revisit, instead of just making an assumption that it's because of some internal deficiency that we can't quite explain. I am lazy, even though I don't know what that means. That answer just stops further exploration. It doesn't mean anything, but it feels like an answer, so why bother thinking more? Anything else is irrelevant. That pay attention to the physical elements of things that you consider to be cognitive tasks, because that might be involved as well. Pay attention to different sensory experiences. People who've struggled their whole lives to wake up to the alarm, all of a sudden, get a tactile alarm instead of an auditory one, not a problem anymore, right? I'm trying to sum up things. Help me out, man. I don't even know.
Yeah, let's see. I was already thinking, but yeah, we talked about I know what we talked
Conditional
about.
positive regard. There's always more.
That's a big one. And like transitions.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of like what you said
Everything's
about.
a transition, not an initiation.
And
of course, with all this stuff, as always, simplest answer that works is the best. It's not worth going into all this with every single thing. It's when something isn't working, then I got to go further into the complexity of it.
Right.
Including in communication, right? I say something, you interpret it differently than I meant it, and now we got a problem. Okay, let's go back. Use the comments there as a sum up. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Talk about acquisition, arrangement, application, desire, design, deliver.
And by the way, I think there were some earlier questions we didn't answer, like, would it be helpful to make a mind map or brainstorm with someone who's good at that task? Those are examples of like when you're at a dead end and you need to elaborate, then try getting more information. Thank you.
Those things are both very commonly helpful. We're going to wrap up here in a very short time, but mind maps are really great, as all offloading is for particular things. Either I'm taking up too much of my mental resources trying to track a thing, it's bigger than I can hold up here, or I need to get something out of my head so that I can focus on something else. Mind maps in particular, kind of like decision-making matrices, whatever. It's a way to put something complicated down in front of you. So, because otherwise, I kind of think of it like a zoom in tool. Like my awareness, sure, I have the whole mind map in there, but I can only look at a portion of it at a time. And then when I shift over here, I can't access this. But if I come back, I lose this. Whereas if I put it all in front of me, I can access more of it. So it can help you to approach things in that way, condense it further. And then brainstorming, we could do a whole thing on like brainstorming. But yeah, brainstorming, really any communication with another person that is safe, is going to help you in some way or another.
Or offloading also, like writing it down, getting it out of if you don't have the opportunity to communicate.
The more knowledge they have, like us, we're experts in this thing, which means we have all these knowledge and frameworks about how the brain works and whatever. We do not know what's going to work for you or not, but we brainstorm together. And because we have information that you don't have, we can help look in a different direction. But no, this isn't an issue. This isn't a matter of you tell us what's going on, we tell you what to do different, and everything will be good. We collectively, together, collaboratively come up with new ideas, and we just iterate, just keep going. That I'll give this last metaphor, and then I'll shut up and let you sign us off. Amelia, is talking about this, things, there's always more. It's not really actually discrete, completable tasks. We just make it that to be useful. This is the thing I always say, because what often happens is, especially when people have negative aims, I'm trying to avoid a thing, but sooner or later, I might do that thing. There's no way to succeed at that task unless I just avoid doing it until I die, right? It's never complete. I have to keep spending resources. Well, what will often happen is the longer I go before the thing happens, the worse I feel when it happens. Because I'm like, oh, I felt so good. I was doing so great. It's been 6 months since the last time I blanked. And it's like, no, having longer times in between that thing happening is progress. It's not worse. It's better. Anyway, here's the thing I always do when people talk about stuff like that is, I keep having this feeling in my stomach and it is so uncomfortable. And I describe it to people and they tell me that it's hunger and that in order to resolve it, I need to eat food. So I do, and it goes away, but then it comes back. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong, because everyone says it's hunger and you eat it to resolve it, or you eat food to resolve it. I do it, it works for a little while, and then it comes back. And I don't know what's wrong with me. This is just life. You don't get to be done until you're done. Just keep doing more. The better you get at a thing, this is a bane of artists, but really everybody, the better you get at some particular skill, that involves looking at, observing that skill with more granular detail, which means we have a term, the zone of proximal development. It doesn't matter what skill you develop, what skill you add, you will see exactly the same amount of flaws in what it is that you're doing. That doesn't go away. So we got to find ways to just do it anyway. Eat food, even though we're going to be hungry again later. It's still worth it. Wrap this up, Amelia.
Okay, it's funny that you shared that analogy, because I feel like I was losing steam towards the end because I'm hungry. So I heard you saying that and I was like, oh, okay, so that's what I need to go do. But and I think one other thing I wanted to add is like, just thank you for engaging in the comments and sharing ideas and questions, because just in line with that, like, we don't have all the answers immediately ready to dispense. Just like sometimes someone asks you a question and you're like, of course, also we do have to work on that skill and be able to recall things. But when someone brings something to the table, that's when it's like, okay, I can now specifically access the piece of information I want to share, like as it relates to that. But when it's general, sometimes it can be like, well, anyway, we'll find something, and it's awesome. We found
how do I be happy?
Topics.
That's a hard one. I call that the dragon's hoard. We'll talk about that, but we got to wrap up.
Yeah, I love that one. But thank you. It was I enjoyed being here today. So
thank you all. Thanks for chatting with us. We'll see you same time next week.
Okay.